This is our News the Weekend edition, and on the broadcast tonight, officials say that fire at the city dump is now contained. This as residents of the Mud and Abaco deal with a large fire which destroyed dozens of homes. And not so fast. A prominent attorney warns government about moving ahead and criminalizing marital rape.
Brought to you by Alive, the nation's newest and best LTE network.
Good to be alive.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Knowles, and thanks for joining us. Topping the news, firefighters and officials of the Department of Environmental Health Services are continuing to battle that blaze at the city dump, which broke out yesterday afternoon. Now officials worked throughout the night to keep the fire contained and ensure it did not spread. But the winds did prove a challenge.
Okay, at this point, we have smoke blowing in the direction which is heading west, and smoke is traveling, same as we reported earlier this morning. The residents of the Northern Jubilee Gardens community, they're already feeling the effects of it, and this travel just across Gladstone Road heading towards west, and resources are on the ground, but again, this is a slow process. It's not a fast process where you can have a fire extinguishing in a matter of minutes. It's because of the kinds of materials that are being dealt with here.
Senior Deputy Director in the Department of Environmental Health Services with responsibility for the landfill, Thomasina Wilson, told our news that they have the fire under control and that smoke suppression is the main focus at this point.
What we are doing right now, we are still excavating areas with the excavators and the water trucks that really helped us into the night to try to contain it. Most of what we are dealing with right now is to try to quiet down the smoke so that it won't affect the residents.
Wilson said what's different than last year's massive fire is that this time the fire is contained to just a small area of the site.
This would take us probably another couple of days to really extinguish the whole area and the whole scope of what is happening here. But we need to urge residents to be careful what they put in the waste stream, because most of these fires are because of I guess, bad practices from the household and wind up putting a lot of stuff in the waste stream that don't need to be in there. And the operators themselves, we try to do the best we can with the equipment that we have. And once something happens, we try to get on it as quickly as possible. But by the same token, the residents really need to help us with regards to what they put into the waste stream.
As the winds shifted throughout the night, residents in Jubilee Gardens and the surrounding communities had to either endure the heavy smoke or evacuate.
It was awkward last night when the smoke started. You can still see the flames in the air. Started to produce that black smoke, and it started to get heavy and thick. And as the wind switched, headed in the direction of the Jubilee 3 area, everyone had to evacuate. A few persons who did not know where to go, they had to remain in their homes. But this is a situation we've been fighting, and we're asking for help and assistance from the government, so they can try to see how best they can relieve us. We have people with respiratory syndromes like my mom and others in the back here. We have babies. We need some help, some sort of relief.
And while those residents here in New Providence are primarily dealing with smoke emanating from the dump fire, many residents of the Mud and Abaco watched their homes go up in flames as a fire ripped through that shanty town. Now, fortunately, there were no deaths or injuries from that fire, which started around 6 this morning.
There are a number of homes which were destroyed by fire. The local volunteer fire brigade in Marsh Harbor, they were deployed there, and after speaking with them, we had a conversation with them, and there was a need for the volunteers out of trip.
Evans estimates anywhere between 50 to 100 homes being destroyed. As for how the fire might have started, Evans says they are following a lead in their investigations.
At this point right now, police are questioning one person, and so we're treating this really as a suspicious matter. And so once we're able to conclude our investigations and complete the preliminary findings, and then you'll be alerted to know exactly what was the cause of the start of this blaze.
In other news this evening, Minister of Works Desmond Bannister is firing back at Exuma's and Ragged Island MP Chester Cooper, who recently claimed the Minnis administration is dragging its feet when it comes to restoring key utilities and government buildings on Ragged Island following Hurricane Irma. Our Jasmine Brown has that report.
Bannister was candid in his response as he revealed he was highly disappointed in Cooper's comments.
I was disappointed in him saying that, and I told him that BPL has electricity up in Ragged Island. We have the poles up, we have the wires up. They did an amazing job in very difficult circumstances.
During a press conference at PLP headquarters earlier this month, Cooper said the situation is still critical on Ragged Island. It was deemed uninhabitable following the passage of Hurricane Irma last September. Days after the storm, Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis urged residents to evacuate due to the level of devastation. But many of those who remained and were evacuated insisted they would rebuild their community. The Minnis administration also announced plans to rebuild Ragged Island as a green city. But according to Cooper, they are still severely lacking key resources as public buildings are still in ruins 4 months after the monster storm. But Bannister says it's not as simple as Cooper is making it out to be, asserting many of the homes were so badly damaged by the storm that they cannot be reconnected to the grid.
The houses are not up to par. So for example, if you go there and you connect the BPL infrastructure to somebody's house, and the wiring in that house is not up to par, you're going to cause major problems. Mr. Cooper knows that, so it was irresponsible what he said. And the last thing you need is someone who has electrical problems being connected to the grid and then causing a problem for the whole settlement.
Bannister says not only does BPL recognize the issue, they are going above and beyond to help those homeowners.
What BPL is doing now to even facilitate them is to send master electricians to Ragged Island. So instead of a householder having to pay an electrician to come in and ensure that his wiring is up to par, BPL is going to actually check them out, ensure that they're up to par, and then connect them to the grid. This is a wonderful public service that BPL is doing. Mr. Cooper ought to leave the politics out of this. These are people who are hurting, and they have not, in many cases, been able to bring their homes up to the standard where they can be properly connected to the grid.
Now, the Works Minister says no matter how anyone sees it, the truth of the matter is there is still no quick fix. Reporting for our news, I'm Jasmine Brown.
All right, thanks, Jasmine. Queen's Counsel Wayne Munro is advising government to not move so fast with criminalizing marital rape, as he believes it could make room for a ton of other legal arguments. He sat down with our Kyle Joaquin.
Now, if you're concerned about the level of penalty, it's a crime, so you're not criminalizing that. That behavior is already criminalized. You can talk about the penalty.
2 weeks ago, Attorney General Carl Bethel advised the United Nations Human Rights Commission that government has plans to move forward with legislation to make aggravated spousal sexual abuse a criminal offense. But Munro says, what is it really?
You have behavior now that is criminalized. It's sexual assault on a spouse. Right. I don't know the importance of what you call something, other than trying to make statements like married women are the same as single women. If your wife is or husband is changing their status from being married to being single, or getting rid of the right for you to cohabit with you, because that is a right in marriage, that spouses have the right to cohabit, live with one another sexually. That's a right you get on marriage. Judicial separation brings that right to an end. So if your spouse is seeking to do that and you have sex with them against their consent, then that's a crime.
He asserted that criminalizing marital rape or terming it as aggravated sexual spousal abuse could make way for a whole new set of legal arguments. For example,
you first criminalize as rape conduct within marriage. Your proposition being that married women are the same as single women, and that marriage isn't about reproductive sex. The next step from that is civil unions and same-sex civil unions, because you've established that marriage is not about reproductive sex. And the last step that they've taken in the UK now, where they started on this road back in I think it was in the 1990s with R&R, is if I'm a transgender person, so if I was born a woman, but I'm really a man, when through medical procedures I am made to be a man, which accords with who I say I am, then my privacy right permits me to re-register as a man, and nobody needs to know that.
The issue has reignited debate in all sectors of society, even drawing different views from religious leaders.
So this concept that women aren't protected from violence is very wrong. The court can put a man out his house without him being heard if his wife comes and says that violence is going to be used against her. We have what we call domestic violence protection orders, which protects you against all type of behavior. One of the behavior that it protects a woman against, well, it's not gender specific, but now it's saying it's from a female point of view, is husbands using financial pressure and duress. That is protected.
Monroe said he plans on releasing a paper on the issue in the near future. For our news, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
Days after a former police officer was charged with rape, National Security Minister Marvin James revealed that government is moving to raise the level of professionalism on the Royal Bahamas Police Force. He noted that whenever a law enforcement officer breaches public trust, it tarnishes the entire organization.
We understand that we have to take an aggressive approach to cleaning up our organizations, our law enforcement organizations.
Last summer, a Royal Bahamas Police Force officer and a Defense Force officer pleaded guilty to drug and firearm charges. 1 month later, 2 police officers were disciplined after they were featured in a profanity-laced video that went viral. Dame says recruitment and training are key.
We're now working towards introducing body cams for police officers. We're looking at our recruitment, and so in a big way, we're at the tail end of completing a manpower audit of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the first in its kind as far as I can remember. And this audit would take a look at any number of things. And one of the things that we continue to focus on is recruitment and training for law enforcement officers.
Well, nearly 9 months after the Minnis administration took office and promised to amend and introduce a real Freedom of Information Act, members of civil society are still awaiting a clear timeline for that legislation. Here's our Christina Dragovich.
Some members of civil society were hoping that more action would have been taken on the Freedom of Information legislation since the bill was passed. However, according to Organization for Responsible Governance Executive Director Matt Aubrey, there is no clear timeline in place.
When it was passed last year, the hope is that a lot more would have happened. What we see is that a few parts of the bill have been enacted, which is kind of not consistent with how these things roll out. There's an ability to hire an information commissioner. There was a repeal of the 2012 bill. And what we've heard from the AG as recently as last month is that there will also be enacted the whistleblowers legislation to support a lot of the anti-corruption efforts that are going on.
Aubrey says civil society needs to understand when and how the bill will be introduced. In the meantime, organizations are planning additional meetings with the Attorney General's office and town hall meetings to ensure that once the legislation is introduced, Bahamians know how to use it.
We've reached out and really made the request of government to understand what's the timeline for implementation. What we've understood is that government is seeking consultation with folks in the UK as to how they rolled out their right to information bill to understand what should be best done here in terms of bringing on an information commissioner, setting up the regulations that drive it, and also ultimately preparing government
Aubrey admits that some changes have to be made before the bill can take effect.
Well, that in our current system of government means that there's going to be lots of changes on IT, on processes, on training for folks to be able to not only gather and retrieve information, but provide it and record those requests. So there's a lot that has to happen in government, but there's also a lot that has to happen for civil society. We have to train our citizens, our media, our academia as to how to use this bill. Why is it valuable? Why would you use it? To ensure that we see fair practices, to ensure that we make better decisions.
He says it is important to not let the pressure die on the issue, which is essential to a healthy democracy. Reporting for our news, I'm Christina Dragovich.
All right, thanks, Christina. Well, the chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, Fred Mitchell, is defending himself and his party following the Prime Minister's announcement that he intends to lead a delegation on a global anti-corruption and investment tour. According to Mitchell, the then opposition questioned the rate of travel by himself and other ministers, and now the shoe is on the other foot.
Love when a man finds religion, and there's no one who finds religion as quickly as the Prime Minister. The whole question of them going on a promotional tour and an anti-corruption tour, I'm not sure what anti-corruption tour means, but a promotional tour, there's no issue with that. We've always said so. You have to travel. This is an island nation. You can't sit in an island nation by yourself. You have to go out and visit the outside world. So what it does is it puts the lie to all of the things that they said during the campaign, and it makes a bit of a joke of it.
Mitchell says he doesn't understand the need for the tour. However, he wishes the Prime Minister the best.
We wish him luck with his promotional campaign. It's a little silly to be talking about an anti-corruption campaign because recently it was announced that the Bahamas is the least corrupt country in the Caribbean. I'm not sure what that's about, but again, it's this narrative which they keep pushing about corruption. And I've never seen a man who keeps talking down his own country in that way.
And we'll take a break here, but still ahead tonight, find out BPL's plan to keep the lights on during the upcoming busy summer months. Plus, find out more on the upcoming State of the Economy report. Those stories and more when our news returns.